Hey, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher. In this video, I want to talk about different note naming systems and the benefits and drawbacks that you can get with different systems. Now, as a bit of a backstory, the whole reason that I find this topic so interesting is because when people get involved in ear training, people start realizing that if you don't have perfect pitch, everything is heard using relative pitch and everything is heard in context. So what starts to make a lot of sense is that if you're going to learn whether scales, chord progressions, patterns, learn to sing arpeggios or tonal patterns, if you want to call them that, using a movable system actually aligns better with the way that we naturally hear things. So again, if you don't have perfect pitch and you're trying to learn patterns and give those patterns labels, it's really efficient to use a movable system because quite literally you can move the pattern around into whatever key you're in and have the same label. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you, I'm going to unpack this a little bit more as we go. But what I want to say just to kick this video off is I think that logic makes perfect sense, and it's a real thing that happens when people start ear training. Using movable systems is wildly powerful. And I'm actually not recommending that you abandon that. But what I do want to address is the other side of the argument where people start seeing the benefits of a movable system, and it's so powerful in terms of audiation. People start saying things like, well, fixed do is bad, or using fixed pitch letters. So, for example, this C on the piano, it's always a C. It doesn't matter if I'm in the key of B flat. It doesn't matter if I'm in the key of A minor, right? And so there is a problem in terms of beginners can often get confused between the names of the notes having a fixed location, but in terms of your ear having a different function. And so movable systems can kind of bypass this problem in the beginning. But the claim that I really want to address in this video that's often brought up a lot by people that do ear training. I've heard many people in the Edwin Gordon community, in the music learning theory community, say things along the lines of learning a fixed system or learning fixed pitch letters, which is functionally the same. Fixed do and fixed pitch letters are the same. They're just different labels for the same mapping in terms of the note naming. I've heard many people in this community say things like, if you use pitch letters, it'll destroy people's audiation. Or if you use pitch letters, it'll confuse students too much. And further claims are made that pitch letters serve no purpose. All they do is confuse people. And I passionately disagree with that. So I would like to just take some time in this video to talk a little bit about what are the difference between fixed systems and movable systems, and why I actually think you should be using both, and why I think you should learn both. And I don't think the conversation is as simple as saying like movable do is good and pitch letters are bad. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And hopefully when you leave this video, it'll give you some ideas as to why many world-class and professional musicians use a hybrid approach of using a fixed system along with a movable system. Because I think it offers benefits that you quite frankly can't get when you only use a movable system in isolation. So just to catch everyone up to speed, I mean, what is the difference between a movable system and a fixed system? So when we're playing music, we're going to be playing in a tonal context. Now there's going to be people that jump in right away and say, what about atonal music? I tend to line up with Edwin Gordon on this topic. I think pure atonal music doesn't really exist in the way that a lot of people think it does. We're still hearing chords and tones in terms of a tonal center. Now that tonal center might be shifting rapidly and changing and be really subjective. Maybe some person hears A as the tonal center and some person hears C. But the way we audiate chords and scales and harmony is through some kind of tonal center. So suffice it to say that we're hearing music in a tonal center most of the time. So because of this, what happens is, unless you have perfect pitch, the way you're actually listening to music is with relative pitch. So if I play this, we're in the key of C right now. Now I could change keys. I could change keys again. And what people have really noticed is that because the way we audiate is contextual. It's in relationships. So again, if you don't have perfect pitch, what's making you able to make sense of this melody? And if I change keys, what's making the melody sound familiar is that when I play this first melody, all the notes have a relationship against the tonal center. And when I change keys, the reason it sounds familiar or similar, even though it's in a different key, is because the relationship of all the other notes is in the same, all the other notes are in the same relationship to the new tonal center. And so what can confuse students, and I think this is really important to acknowledge from the beginning, is that when you teach students, or you as a student yourself, learn note names on a piano or whatever, or on a guitar, or just on a music staff, you may not be learning the note names in context. So for example, again, here's my lick in the key of C. And maybe I'll do the same thing in A. Now what happens with beginners, many beginners, is when they learn note names like this. So my note names for this lick in the key of C would be C, D, E, F, G, mainly. And then when I do it in the key of A, B, C sharp, D, E, there's no rational way to compare the two. So there's no way of saying, okay, C, D, E, F, G in the key of C is related to A, B, C sharp, D, E. It just seems crazy for the beginner. They can't make sense of why would those two things have a similar sound in terms of sounding like a major scale lick, but they use different pitch letters. And so this is actually the reason, this is the whole reason that people are recommending movable systems. Because if we have a sound like this, and instead of calling it by the note names, like a fixed note name, we just give it a label based off of its relationship to the resting tone, it becomes much easier for most beginners to recognize and label this pattern. So now if we use movable solfege and we call this do, re, mi, fa, so, and then we change keys to the key of A, this is still do, re, mi, fa, so. Doesn't matter what key we put it in. And you could do the same thing with numbers. You could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm changing keys very fast, but I'm just making the point that what happens when we use a movable system, whether it's movable do with a do bass minor or movable do with a la bass minor or intervals, I'm going to go into all those systems more specifically. But when we use a movable system, it gives the same label to all these different sounds. These different sounds meaning sounds in different keys that actually sound the same. So this melody sounds the same in all these different keys. And if we just say, okay, we're in the key of C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're in the key of F sharp, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're in D flat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It really makes it easier to wrap your mind around what's happening. It also makes transposing very easy, because if you know either the movable solfege or the interval numbers, and we'll get into more into the benefits and drawbacks of each of those even, it makes transposing very easily, makes memorizing things very easily. It almost doesn't really matter what key someone's playing in. If you have the ability to kind of find this on a piano or a fretboard or a violin fretboard, it's very easy to navigate. And that's mainly the reason why we teach movable systems, is that they give the learner a rational way to navigate different melodies that actually sound the same, because most of us don't have perfect pitch, right? They give the learner that benefit. It opens this level of clarity that is just really wonderful. So typically in these traditions that support movable do, when we're playing a song, you would say something like, okay, C is do, now you're off to the races. Or E is do, and now you're off to the races. So we do still need the letter name to tell us where we should start. E is now do. But all of the patterns and all of the things we've learned, if we know that do, mi, so, do, fa, la is like if we know that's a 1 to 4, that relationship gets transferred into every other key. It makes navigating everything very easy. That is a real benefit. That is the reason movable do is so powerful, whether it's with a la bass minor or a do bass minor. That is the reason using numbers is so powerful. And I'm actually saying you need that. So whether you need pitch letters or not, whether you're going to use pitch letters or not, you actually need a system like that. And that's how most people think of chord progressions. So if we say the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, we use functions that refer to a number. Now, just as a little preview, so there are different kinds of movable systems, and the main three in Western music are movable do, so solfege, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and there's two kinds of movable do. One can be a la bass minor, and one can be a do bass minor, and they both have benefits and drawbacks. And then there's an interval system where we just use numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, in terms of solfege, I think the real spirit behind using these syllables, do, re, mi, fa, so, they're easy to sing. They're easy to actually say. When you try to say like F sharp or G sharp as an actual label, it gets a little bit clunky. So solfege syllables have the benefit of, even when you do sharps, like instead of fa, you would do fi, they're performable with one syllable. So if you're going to sing a melody and actually say what the tones are, do, mi, or do, mi, so, if you're actually going to say it while you're singing, it's executable. So that's really the only reason that we use those syllables instead of letters that would move around. They're just easier to vocalize. Now, when we have movable do with the do bass minor versus movable do with a la bass minor, I just want to give you a little preview into this, because this is very important to understand if you don't understand it already. There are different schools of thought into why you would want to use one or the other. So movable do with the do bass minor, if I take this pattern, there we go, do, re, mi, fa, so. Now if I want to switch the pattern into minor, all I need to do, do stays the same, and there are certain notes that need to be adjusted. And so this is really the whole point of movable do with a la bass minor. Whatever key we're playing in, whatever tonality we're playing in, do is always the tonal center. So we could be in Lydian, we could be in Dorian, we could be in natural minor, harmonic minor, melodic minor, we could be in Lydian sharp 2. It does not matter. That tone is always going to be do. And so the benefit of this is that when you play things from major to minor, for example, if I went, so Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, my solfege syllables would start as do, do, so, so, la, la, so. Now all I need to do to change that, the solfege syllables are going to stay the same, do, do, so, so. Instead of la, I would use lay. And what happens is the patterns that you know are very easy to contort into minor. The relationships all stay the same. Now, that's just a very quick, brief intro into what movable do with the do bass minor is. But that is the signature benefit of movable do with a do bass minor, is that if we know patterns and they're over the resting tone, so do. If I want to make that minor, I only need to change the solfege syllables of a couple specific notes. Everything else is retained. So for example, in movable do with the do bass minor, if I go bum, bum, which would be 5, 1, it sounds the same in major and minor, essentially. So if I go, there's major, now my minor. So again, the benefit here is that this sound, so to do, it retains its label, whether you move from major to minor or Dorian or whatever. It always sounds the same. It's always labeled the same. Now, there's another school of thought on this where you would use movable do with a la bass minor. So for example, C major and A minor are relative to each other. So they're made up of the same tones, but if you make someone hear C as the resting tone, it sounds like C major. If you make someone hear A as the resting tone, it sounds like A minor. And so what's also very powerful is giving these major and minor scales separate labels for their resting tone. And a really practical example of this is a tune like Autumn Leaves, which it kind of starts in it's constantly shifting back and forth between relative major, relative minor, C major, A minor. And the benefit of using movable do with a law bass minor is that when you move to the minor gets its own syllable for the resting tone. So the resting tone of minor would be called la. There's la. And then when I move to major, and I now hear the resting tone for the major tonality, it's called do. And there are actually a lot of benefits to movable do with a law bass minor because it's so common that you're going to be finding music that shifts between relative major, relative minor. It just makes sense at a certain level to have different labels for those. And also because these scales use the exact same tones, it makes it very apparent how, you know, if I go do, re, mi, but I hear do as the resting tone. So do, re, mi has a very specific sound. Do, re, mi. But if I establish minor, do, re, mi. Now do, re, mi sounds different. Because la is my resting tone. And so there you can go into a lot more detail about the benefits of movable do with a law bass minor, but there are actual considerable benefits to using movable do with a law bass minor. And this is where this gets sticky, is that there are benefits to movable do with a do bass minor in terms of clarifying your thinking and giving better labels to what you audiate, but there's also benefits to movable do with there's benefits to the other one. Benefits of both. So where do intervals fit in with this? Because we can also label things by just using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Or 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5. Now, intervals are essentially functioning the same way as movable do with the do bass minor. So if you actually think about this, when you label something, maybe a scale or an arpeggio or a melody, say we go do, re, mi, fa, so. If I switch that to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's functionally the same. It's conceptually the same. It's laid out the same. Now, one thing I will say that is not the same, and one of the reasons I don't actually like movable do, or one of the reasons I don't like intervals being used completely in place of either movable do, or we'll get to fixed do and fixed pitch letters in a sec, is that say, for example, you wanted to label a 1-4 progression. So you're going to go, I'm going to do a voice led thing here. So say I'm going to take the tones. So I'm playing a 1 chord, very common voicing, and then I'm playing a 4 chord. Now, if we use movable do with either a do bass minor or a la bass minor, it doesn't matter. We could call this do, mi, so. And we can learn to associate, well, when I hear do, mi, so, that's a 1 chord. Now, when I hear do, fa, la, that's a 4 chord. So the 4 chord is made up of do, fa, la. The 1 chord is made up of do, mi, so. Doesn't matter if you're using movable do with a do bass minor or la bass minor. Now, what I think sucks about interval numbers is that if you don't use movable do with a do bass minor or la bass minor, and you try to use intervals as a fully movable system, what you end up with is something like this. You end up having to label it like this: 1, 3, 5, 1, 4, 6. And the reason I'm not a fan of this is what we're doing is we're labeling the tones of the 4 chord, an F chord in this case. I'm in C major, going to F. What we're doing is we're giving labels to the 4 chord using numbers that relate to the tonic chord. So in the beginning, this doesn't seem like a big deal. It's like, wow, this is kind of cool because when I play like a 5 chord, I really know it's 5, 4, 2, 7. Honestly, this gets very clunky when the harmony of the tunes starts getting more complicated. So if you're playing over tunes with like 1, 4, and 5 progressions, it's not a big deal. It's not really going to cause you any problems. Where it gets very clunky is when you have progressions that are moving through many keys and jazz progressions and classical progressions, modal interchange and stuff like that. it's a really clunky system to use. So I don't usually recommend that people use movable numbers to label individual melody notes. Now, what do I recommend number system for? Number systems are very good for labeling the harmonic functions. So when you say this is a 1 chord, this is a 2 chord. And the benefit of that is, when we're in the key of C, for example, when I label something a 5 chord, it's a 5 chord, and you start associating, well, this 5 chord, it has a sound in relation to the C. So that's all good. Now, I'm going to come back to number systems in a sec, because when you combine an interval numbering system with movable do when you combine a number system with fixed do or pitch letters, it's totally fine. It actually works really well for that kind of thing. But we'll come back to that in a sec. So again, just to recap, we have 3 main movable systems. We have movable do with a do bass minor, which is really good for knowing how to transpose stuff between major and minor and even other tonalities. We have movable do with the la bass minor, which in another sense is really good for changing from relative major to relative minor. And it tends to be really good for beginning audiators. There's something nice about, when you hear a minor tonality, the resting tone is la. When you hear a major tonality, the resting tone is do. When you hear Phrygian, the resting tone is mi. And there is actually a benefit of teaching beginning audiators with totally different sets of labels for every tonality. So those systems both have benefits. Now the interval system, again, to recap, it's conceptually identical to movable do with a do bass minor, but I'm less of a fan of labeling individual chord tones and individual melody notes with that system. For example, if you use movable do just in general, doesn't matter which one, and you go do, mi, so, do, fa, la, I'm perfectly fine with that. I feel like that is much more natural for people to audiate and give labels to rather than going 1, 3, 5, 1, 4, 6. I'm not a fan of using numbers in that particular way. And I'll come back to why that is when we get into the next section. So that's the first part of the conversation. It's important that you understand that before this next part, where we can start to compare fixed systems and the benefits and drawbacks of the fixed systems compared to this. So fixed systems, there's really 2 main ones. There's either fixed do or pitch letters. So with fixed do, for example, I'm in the key of C right now. This would be do, re, mi, fa, so. That's fine. It seems the same as movable do right now. But if I change keys to G, this melody is now no longer do, re, mi, fa, so. This melody is now so, la, ti, do, re. Now, in relation to what I initially brought up in the start of the video, this can cause confusion with beginners. Because if I play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, if I play something like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and change it to another key, for the beginner, when you change keys and you have the same labels for the song in C major and the song in G major, it makes it very easy for them to process. They're like, yeah, they sound the same and they have the same labels. Now, when we use a fixed system, that all kind of goes out the window. And so this is one of the downfalls of fixed systems, is in the beginning, they seem to make it more clunky for the student. They essentially require 12 times the amount of labels to get the same benefit. So again, with a movable system, we can just change keys, no problem, because it has the same labels. We just say, okay, C is the resting tone, bang, here we go. E flat's the resting tone, bang, here we go. But when you use a fixed system, you don't know the labels that quickly. They don't generalize as quickly. You actually have to learn them all. So in the key of G, for example, all of these tones have a different relationship over the tonal center. So it can seem like it creates a lot of work for the student in the beginning, and it seems like it can be very confusing for the student in the beginning. Now, I think you can actually totally solve for this problem, and with proper instruction that's clear and guided well, students do not get confused. I think that the concerns that many people in the MLT community, music learning theory, and in other music learning communities. I'm not just picking on my Edwin Gordon friends, but a lot of the concerns about movable systems causing problems with audiation, I really think are a function of poor instruction. They're not a function of the fixed system inherently being bad. A lot of people say things like, well, if we just learn a fixed system or pitch letters, we're going to be memorizing things and just hitting the keyboard and not audiating. And that's totally not true. I mean, what produces audiation, tonal audiation? It's singing things, it's knowing how to sing the resting tone, it's learning to sing tonal patterns, it's learning melodies, it's learning how to sing bass lines. And all of those skills have nothing to do with which syllable system you're using. So unfortunately, a lot of people that do use pitch letters or do use fixed do don't do, what I would say helpful audiation exercises with people. And so, yeah, those people don't learn to audiate. But if you learn to sing bass lines, learn to sing resting tones, learn to sing many different tonal patterns in different tonalities, you're going to learn to audiate well. But the question is, what systems should you be using in terms of the solfege? And, why are certain systems helpful with certain things? And because that's the big point I'm trying to make here, is that the different systems provide different benefits. And so it's actually useful to use a combination of them. So back to fixed systems, for example. So fixed systems have this giant problem in the beginning of not making sense to people. So what benefits do the fixed systems actually have? And this is the part that I haven't heard clearly enunciated by music educators. But the fixed system, when we start doing things, like for example, if we're just gonna be playing a bunch of songs using 1-4-5 progressions, then I'm totally fine with people just using movable do or intervals. It's great. It's wonderful. It feels natural. It goes on a keyboard or a guitar fretboard just so perfectly. I mean, the patterns literally, they're isomorphic. So on a guitar fretboard, if you see do, mi, so, fa, re, ti, if you want to change keys, you just shift the thing up. Do, mi, so, fa, re, ti. It's so natural for someone to do that kind of processing. And it can seem crazy. Like, why would I want to learn all of the note names to do the same thing? So I'm going to be spending a lot of time. I'm going to have to learn everything in all 12 keys just to be able to play the same thing. And this is where I think people are a little short-sighted and kind of sleeping on the benefits of fixed systems. So when we start getting into things like modal interchange, and we start getting into things like playing polychords or playing secondary dominant progressions, those are the three, I would say the three heavy hitters. Fixed systems become so much easier to deal with. So for example, there's a famous Beatles song that sounds like that starts with this chord progression. So the chord progression is C, D, F to C. I'm playing in a different key. But what happens is that D chord is not native to the key of C. We could call that D chord a secondary dominant. Now, we can deal with that using movable do. We can just give that, there's one note in there that's changed. We can just give that a different syllable. But there is a benefit to just, when you have the fixed system online, you can think of that chord in a couple ways. So when I play that D7 chord, I can actually think, well, that D7 chord has this F sharp note. It's kind of like I'm in the key of G for a sec. So I'm in the key of C. So for a second, while I'm on this D chord, I can be thinking of the key of G while still hearing in the key of C. Now for this example, it's not a big deal. People could probably get by with this using movable do. But where this really gets crazy is when you start playing actual jazz standards. So very common progression in jazz tunes would be like 2-5-1. So here's 2-5-1. Now listen to this. So this is a very common progression. I'm playing E minor 7 flat 5, A7 to D minor, and then I'm going D minor, G, C. Let me play this again. Now these kind of chord progressions are an absolute nightmare to label using solfege. I have tried both doing it myself and teaching students to do it, and they're very clunky to deal with using solfege. Now, why would this be? When we take the progression E minor 7 flat 5 to A7, and I'll put it up here, what's really useful is we can think of this in two ways. We can think of this is a 2-5-1 in D minor, but we're hearing it in the key of C. Now, what ends up being really powerful is on an instrument or just in your own mind on a music staff or whatever, all of the labels you have for 2-5-1 in D minor, E minor 7 flat 5, A7 to D minor, they also work in the key of C when you're playing this progression. This progression also shows up a lot in the key of B flat. This is the first change of Stella by Starlight. I think the original doesn't formally have that chord. It's like a diminished chord, but that's how pretty much everyone plays it. This progression also shows up actually in the key of D minor. There's other places it can show up too, but those are the main things. So what's weird is we have this chord progression that looks like it's in D minor, but it shows up in the key of C, shows up in the key of B flat. And we're not hearing this as a key change to D minor. We're hearing this as a secondary dominant progression in these keys. So if you're not familiar with this topic, this is going to seem crazy, but this is actually very common. This is the magic of jazz harmony, and I would say a lot of classical harmony, all the way back to Bach, is the power of secondary dominant progressions. And what I've noticed is when you interview like professional musicians, 99.9% of the musicians I have come across that can improvise well over these kind of chord progressions and that can play these chord progressions and that can navigate them, they all think about it in this way with a fixed pitch letter system. And the reason is that the information you have from like 2-5-1 to D minor, it can just be transplanted into other keys. Now, if you try to do that with solfege, you have to come up with a ridiculous set of labels for all of these progressions. And it's quite clunky. And it's one of the things like Movable Do with a Do bass minor or a La bass minor is really good at certain things, but it is not good at this. So just like how pitch letters are confusing for the beginner when they're trying to get a handle on basic audiation and notice how they're really trying to label the relative pitch that they're audiating. Movable systems are beautiful at that. They are terrible at this skill. And this is what fixed systems are really good at. So fixed systems are really good at secondary dominant progressions. They're also very good when you're dealing with chord kind of superimposing chords. So say I did a 2-5-1 in A minor. Over this B minor chord, I'm going to put a D minor arpeggio. Over this E7, I'm going to put an F minor. This is like the most cliche stuff ever. Have a listen to this. Everyone plays this. I'm not even sure where this came from, but what I'm trying to point at is this isn't some crazy like super fringe jazz thing that I'm saying. All jazz musicians basically know what I just played. It's a very cliche thing. It's been played for like 100 years. And the way you think about this is like, okay, on this B minor chord, I'm using a D minor or D melodic minor. On this E7 chord, I'm using F minor or F melodic minor. And on this A chord, I'm using A melodic minor. But this is another situation where pitch letters they really make this process more simple, because all you need to do is say, okay, over this chord, I can put this chord. And now over this chord, I can put this other chord. And instead of needing to calculate like the interval structure and how this fits over that, you just basically just memorize the relationships. Well, whenever I have B minor 7 flat 5, I can also impose over it D minor. And this is so much easier to deal with than using a movable system. If you try to use a movable system, so I've had people try to use this with numbers, for example, and it's really just a mess, because what people end up doing is, okay, I'm on the 2 chord, but on the 2 chord, I can go up to the 3rd and then play that melodic minor scale. Now, that's actually very useful for transposing. So I'm not saying that mental process is bad, but when you're actually playing an instrument, you don't have time to be navigating things like that. You don't have time to say like, well, I'm on the 2 chord, So I can go up a third, and now I can play minor 1 flat 3 5 7. That kind of thinking, again, is very useful when you're transposing. No good while you're actually playing. You need to just have it memorized. Well, what do I put over B minor 7 flat 5? D minor 9. It has to be that fast. What do I put over E7? F minor or F melodic minor. Pitch letters are so good at this. They're wonderful at this. The other benefit of pitch letters or fixed do is, and this is really cool, it takes time to get this online. So I'm not saying this is easy, but when you have this online, the fixed system actually functions like movable do and, movable do with a do bass minor and movable do with a la bass minor at the same time. So for example, if I'm in C major, I can easily think from C major to A minor. I can see how C, D, E, it sounds the same in C major, or it sounds like something in C major, but those same notes, they have a different quality in the relative minor. And so in that sense, the way I'm describing it, going from C major to C major to A minor, it feels like using movable do. Now, I'm not strictly actually using movable do, but I'm able to draw the same comparison conceptually between the labels. But what's crazy is at the same time, if you say, okay, forget that, let's go C major to C minor, I can also make that change, that's what movable do with a do bass minor is very good at, comparing C major to C minor. They have the same resting tone, they're parallel. And it makes that comparison very easy. So what ends up happening is when you go far down the road enough with the fixed system, whether it's pitch letters or fixed do, it doesn't matter, they're the same thing. You get the benefit that movable do with a do bass minor and movable do with a la bass minor have, part of the benefit. Now, can you use fixed systems totally on their own? No, you can't. You have to combine a fixed system with something else. And what do we combine it with? I think the best thing to combine it with is the actual number system. Because if you go back to earlier in this video, I talked about one of my less favorite things about using intervals is this, using intervals for chord functions is absolutely perfect. In fact, all these systems use numbers to label chords. So it doesn't matter if you're using movable do with a do bass minor, la bass minor, or fixed do, everyone uses numbers to label chords, to label chord functions. This is the 1 chord, this is the 4 chord, this is the 5 chord. So there's no problem with that. That's something that intervals have always been used for by everyone. Even people that critique using numbers, like Edwin Gordon, straight up uses numbers to label chord functions. So chord functions are best labeled with intervals, just hands down. Now, when it comes to, intervals suck at labeling individual tones of chords. Because of this problem, like it's clunky to think 1, 3, 5, and then for the 4 chord to think 4, 6, 1, and then for the 5 chord to think 5, 7, 2. It's just clunky. I encourage anyone who uses that and benefits from it to keep using it, but I've just seen so many musicians end up struggling with that. Now, intervals, on the other hand, when they're combined with note names, it actually solves all these problems. There's no problem. I mean, you can be on the 1 chord and know that that's 1, 3, 5. You can be on the 5 chord and know that that's actually 5 in terms of the 4 chord, 5, 1, 3. So the intervals have this ability to laser down in on exactly what you're doing. But when you use the pitch letters in combination with them, the pitch letters let you stay grounded. So if I go C, E, G, C, F, A, then I'm getting the same benefit I would get from using either movable do or movable do with the do bass minor or la bass minor. I'm able to label the individual chord tones, but the intervals let me kind of laser in on each chord and have some sense of what the interval structure is. Now that's actually not that important for your audiation, but it is a benefit. And so, I really think that this conversation has not been thoroughly explored enough, and that's why I wanted to take, a long time here on this video to really unpack this. But I would encourage people to tone down the criticism on fixed solfege systems or fixed pitch letter systems, and just make a more nuanced argument that movable systems have a profound benefit when people are beginning to audiate. But there is a point when people start playing either certain kind of chord progressions, whether they're secondary dominants, or I didn't really get into modal interchange, but fixed pitch letter systems are absolutely beautiful for dealing with modal interchange. And they're very good at dealing with these kind of chord, these polychords or chord super impositions. And the thing I want to really highlight again is that these are not, these examples I'm giving, they're not fringe examples. This is stuff that every jazz musician is playing. I mean, most pop tunes have a lot of modal interchange in them, meaning like you're taking chords from other tonalities, and it just ends up being easier to navigate with a fixed system. So my recommendation for music teachers or for music pedagogues or learners is to really just acknowledge that each system has its benefit, and there's a time and a place for each system. Even the fixed system, the fixed system on its own, which I'm like the biggest champion of, you need to use intervals with it, because you need some way of knowing, like, okay, here's C, D, E, F, G. Now I'm going to change keys to G major, G, A, B, C, D. I need a way of comparing those two, and I can just use the numbers to compare those with each other, and that's actually necessary. Now, the bigger point that I'm making here is, as people get more advanced, you have to use combinations. I mean, you can't use Movable Do on its own. Movable Do needs the numbering system. So for example, Movable Do with a La bass minor, you still have to use intervals, because when we have the 1 chord going to the 4 chord versus in minor, 1 chord to the 4 chord, we still give those chord functions labels, and we're really using an interval system to label those things. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that we have to use two systems, whether you use Movable Do with intervals, or Movable Do, or a fixed system with intervals, or all of them, or a fixed system plus Movable Do plus intervals. You have to use a combination of them because they support each other. My observation has been that most professional, either classical composers or jazz musicians that audiate very, very well, which just takes away the criticism about audiation, they are using a fixed system with movable numbers. And usually the response to that is, well, these people audiate so well, it doesn't even matter what system they use. They could just, their audiation is so powerful, they don't need Movable Do. But I actually think people are missing out on a bigger point. A lot of the more like advanced chord progressions, secondary dominants, modal interchange, superimposing chords, even just noticing how chord extensions work. So, if I take a C chord, but I put an A under it, it looks like I'm holding an A minor 7. If I put an F under that, it looks like I'm holding an F major 9. You can do that with solfege, but man, you can really do that with pitch letters, because the relationships, they hold in a certain way that it doesn't hold with movable systems. So again, we need multiple systems. And what's interesting is that in the wild, I would say the best musicians tend to favor using a combination of a movable number system and a fixed system. And I don't think it's actually a mystery why people are using a fixed system, because often people that are kind of passionate about Movable Do and the benefits it actually does get, they are not aware, or they're not being upfront enough about the benefits that a fixed system can get. And so what are my practical recommendations? Once you can audiate major and minor, and you can really audiate 1, 4, and 5, and maybe like a couple other chords, and you can improvise over those well, and you can sing bass lines. So, I mean, Movable Do all the way with that stuff, or interval numbers all the way. Once you reach that point, that milestone, and you start getting into playing secondary dominants, things with modal interchange, these kind of polychords, superimposed chords, you just are ready to learn the fixed system. And so I'm not saying that Movable Do is bad and don't use it. I'm just saying have a standard for yourself or for your students to know, well, Movable Do is very good at this, and it could be good for like 5 or 10 years of a person's development in the beginning. But there's a time and a place where it's useful to switch to a fixed system. Now, I'm not going to go into this in this video because this is insanely long already, but I prefer just to use a fixed system from the beginning with someone. And I think that this can be done. It requires very careful instruction though, because you need to be careful that when you're getting people to change keys, you're not confusing them. So I do think there's a way that this can be done using a fixed system and an interval numbering system in the beginning. And that's my preferred way of doing it, because in terms of what I'm trying to get students to do, I want to get people into jazz harmony. I want to get people into doing these other kind of things. Not everyone might want to do that. I mean, I teach a lot of jazz, so that usually is the lens I'm looking through. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I could make things a little quicker in certain ways with Movable Do with a La bass minor, which is absolutely wonderful system. But I want to get people to do these other things in the future. And so I would rather plant the seeds with a fixed system with intervals and just do the instruction carefully. And to be honest, it works, because what people really need is, it's not all this like, am I using Movable Do or pitch letters or whatever. The main reason people aren't audiating well is they're not learning to sing in many tonalities. They're not learning to sing tonal patterns. They're not learning melodies and licks by ear. That's what's actually holding people's audiation back. It's not that you're using Movable Do with a Do bass minor, and that's not as good as Movable Do with a La bass minor, or using pitch letters. The real reason pitch letters suck usually when teachers use them is because teachers don't usually do the audiation stuff with people. So yeah, if you're a music teacher, or if you see a music teacher that struggles teaching audiation and they're using pitch letters, I mean, don't throw the pitch letters under the bus. It's probably because that teacher's not getting them to sing a resting tone or like some 1-4-5 tonal patterns or bass lines of songs. That's the actual culprit. The culprit is not the pitch letter system. And so, in my teaching over the past 5 or 6 years, 5 years, I think, I just get people to do all the wonderful stuff that Edwin Gordon recommended and that the music learning theory community recommends. All those things by ear, really training the audiation. And then I just am very careful with how I do pitch letters with absolute beginning students. And no one's ever had a problem with it. I don't see a situation where one beginner who uses Movable Do with a La bass minor ends up audiating way better than someone who uses pitch letters. It just doesn't really happen. So again, I want to be respectful here. If you're a teacher that likes using Movable Do and you're finding it beneficial for your classroom, maybe you're a primary music teacher and most of your students are singing and not playing instruments, Movable Do is wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. What really matters is that people are doing the things that grow their audiation. But the spirit of this conversation is just to highlight that there are real benefits to each of these systems. And, when you see other teachers using a fixed system and, maybe like, for example, Edwin Gordon wasn't a fan of these fixed systems, which I think was a big mistake on his part, but the guy was a genius nonetheless. I'm just saying the conversation has not been nuanced enough to this point. And that's my contribution to it, is that I learned to audiate with pitch letters and nothing ever really caused a problem. And when you look in the wild, when you look at most professional musicians who can audiate, that can play over these jazz tunes and that can play, more advanced classical music, the ones who can audiate, they tend to use a fixed system with a number system in combination, because I think those two together are the most powerful. If you take all these systems and you say you could only learn 2 of them, the most powerful systems together would be intervals plus pitch letters. Movable Do plus intervals is actually quite redundant in the sense that Movable Do and intervals are pointing at the same thing. I mean, Movable Do with a Do bass minor is the same thing as an interval thing. Movable Do with a La bass minor actually needs intervals, or people won't see the relationship between the chord functions in minor versus major. So Movable Do with a La bass minor actually has to have an interval system with it, even if it's just a light interval system that labels functions. But I really do think that the most powerful combination of all these in terms of the end stage of musical development is Movable Do with is intervals with a fixed system. So that's my take on the topic. It's been a lot of fun thinking about this for the past few years. If you have any questions or comments, hit me down below. Let me know what you like to use. Are you an interval user? Are you a fixed system person? Be fun to know.